am frequently flattered by your faith in me to be able to digest, interpret, and then regurgitate things that are happening in the world of football. But sometimes I'm just not quite clear what's going on either. Now, I will do my best with this one, but it's 3 in the morning, and I've had a very long week, and honestly, I just don't have any time to deal with any more stupid financial tomfoolery going on in the Premier League. So we're going to be pretty straight to the point on this. Manchester City is suing the Premier League because they got caught and now they're trying to change the rules. I could end the video now, but you probably need a little more context. But that's basically what's happening here. Now, Manchester City is going to hire an incredibly high-powered legal team, and they are going to use that incredibly high-powered legal team to attempt to browbeat the public conscience and the rest of the Premier League into accepting their version of reality, which simply is not true. Because if you're participating in the Premier League, whether you agree with FFP or not, which I am on record is not agreeing necessarily with FFP, I think it keeps the rich rich, the poor poor, prevents things from like Leicester City from happening again. I think the rules don't make sense. They're applied unevenly, especially for teams that get promoted and relegated between the Championship and the Premier League. I've talked about all of this already. Right, but if you are going to participate in the Premier League, you're going to agree to a set of rules, which means you are going to agree to the fact that you can be punished if you violate that set of rules. So I would actually legitimately support Manchester City or any other club that decided to challenge the way that FFP works in its current form, to allow for some amounts of investment, to allow for some amounts of club ambition, or to allow for some sort of demonstration of financial health beyond literally just matching your income. Right. For example, Everton's case that their losses tied to the COVID-19 pandemic were incredibly large, but also sustainable as long as they're allowed to finish the new stadium. Well, now, because of FFP, they might not be able to invest the money in the new stadium because that counts as outflow. Right. So there's all sort of fancy accounting they're trying to do at Everton so that that money can be going out. There's so many stupid situations that come off of FFP. Well, I'm generally opposed to anything a state-run club is attempting to do. Anybody wants to challenge FFP, that's great. But Manchester City, they agreed to play in the Premier League. They agreed to play by the Premier League's rules, and they broke them, right? It seems very clear that they broke them. They got 115 charges. I find it very hard to believe that all 115 charges are going to be acquitted. I made an entire video about Manchester City's violations, and the point of their violations, essentially, is that they inflated the value of sponsorships that they received. Now, the way that you're able to do this is when you're a fucking state-run club, you are run by a state. And these states do not operate like a state that, I grew up in, right? Where there is a government and then there are companies. These states operate as in there are government and they run the companies, right? And so if those companies are sponsoring a club that is also owned by a different apparatus of the same bureaucratic machine, this is the difference between like Nestle, right? The candy company. We're talking about 2 candy bars that they make here. And one of those candy bars is sponsoring the other candy bar. That's what Manchester City is accused of doing. Not that that in itself is illegal, but what's illegal is using the fact that you own both of those candy bars to inflate the value of your revenue. So Kit Kat's on one side and Crunch is on the other. Let's say, you are only judged on the revenue that Crunch is making. Well, then you have Kit Kat sponsor Crunch. But since you're basically moving water around in the same pond here, right? Like you're not knocking any of the water out of the fishbowl. You're just moving it from one side of the fishbowl to the other. Let's say Kit Kat decides to sponsor the jersey of Crunch, right? But instead of paying $10 million, which is what everybody else is getting, you decide to pay $22 million. Well, all of a sudden Crunch's revenue is $22 million. And so you were able to report that Crunch made $22 million, and basically Crunch made $0 because the people that own Crunch made $0. The people that own Crunch just decided to move the money from Kit Kat to Crunch. I don't know why they would do that. Kit Kat's better in the first place. That's basically what Manchester City is accused of doing. There are other associated charges for not participating appropriately with the Premier League, not assisting their investigation, which is unsurprising. Right, because I can imagine that basically everybody that ends up in this situation either collaborates either resists the Premier League's investigation or is Everton and admits they did wrong but has an excuse for it, like the kid that got their hand stuck in the cookie jar and then pretends they had diabetes and they need the cookie. Right, so Manchester City was doing a whole lot of that. And the issue with that sort of thing is it requires you to have an accurate valuation of the sponsorship, which is why the investigations have taken so long. Which brings us to Manchester City's lawsuit. They're trying to throw out the league's quote unquote, this according to the Manchester Evening News, unlawful associated party transaction rules, right? Because if Kit Kat and Crunch are both in the same party, that is an associated party transaction. I'm going to keep it a buck with you. I have no idea what the associated party transaction rules are in detail, but based off of the title and the way the rest of this article in particular talks about the associated party rules, Manchester City is trying to throw them away because they feel like these sorts of rules are let me see if I can find it, because I remember laughing at how stupid it was. That these rules are against competition law, as well as being discriminatory to clubs with ties to the Gulf region. I mean, is that just saying the quiet part out loud? I mean, is that really what is going on here? Like, we're saying the quiet part out loud? You feel like associated party transaction rules are victimizing clubs owned by people from the Gulf region. This is like saying weight measurement scales are discriminatory against the United States. Like, just because the scales are saying that you're fat doesn't mean the scales are the problem. You know what I mean? Like, if you're pointing the water gun in the wrong direction here, because the associated party transaction rules are in place to prevent obvious and stupid levels of tomfoolery. And if you were just saying that they're being discriminatory against the Gulf region, then that means you were saying that the Gulf region is it's participating in that stupid amount of tomfoolery, right? Because nobody in their right mind would think that it is fair, if you were all going to agree to FFP, for you to be able to just hand out whatever value sponsorships you want and nobody else can do anything about it. In short, as I understand it, if we're tossing out the associated party transaction rules, everybody else is playing with both their hands and one leg tied behind their back. Because if those rules are gone, a club like Manchester City won't even have to hide it anymore. You just have the airlines sponsor the stadium for $1 billion if one of these princes just happens to have $1 billion lying around. I know that transactionally it's probably not that simple, but practically it is that simple. The only thing stopping Saudi Arabia from turning Newcastle into the world best 11 are rules like this, are rule sets like this that prevent this sort of obvious manipulation of the revenue of a club. Right now, I understand that Manchester City is like, everybody's going to act in their own interest all the time. I wish the world wasn't that way, but it just kind of is. But Manchester City is just going to try to do this. But the fact that they're doing this means they're acknowledging that they broke some of these rules, to be perfectly honest with you. The only reason that you would try and sue and change these rules is admitting that you believe the rules are at the very least restricting the type of business you want to do in the future. And at the very worst, that means that you feel like you've probably broken a lot of these rules. So if you can change them, you pull the rug out from underneath the investigation that's occurring in the first place. You take the teeth out of it. The report in The Times claims that City will argue that the Premier League have failed to provide evidence that sponsorship deals with the related parties give clubs an unfair advantage or distort the league's competitive balance. So I'm going to be honest. I don't even know if we need proof on this one, right? I feel like I live in a pretty solidly proof-oriented reality here. But if you tell me that I'm paying my taxes, and then all of a sudden you tell me that the president has all of those taxes in a personal bank account, but then you attempt to show me proof that the president is only using that to purchase a fairly reasonable number of things, right? Reasonable household things. Maybe he bought one Bugatti, right? Maybe he bought one Jeremy Doku and Erling Haaland, perhaps. But, you know, that you promised me that the president was going to be respectful, right, of the money that it was now all of a sudden entirely in his personal bank account. Can you blame me for wanting to put some sort of measure in place to prevent it, other than just your good word, or other than just saying, hey, you need to prove explicitly that this is distorting the league's competitive balance, when really you should just be able to look at the situation and realize there's a pretty obvious opportunity to distort the league's competitive balance, whether it's already been exercised to an extreme extent or not. And also, isn't that the 115 charges thing? Isn't that what the Premier League's already investigating? The hearing has already started. It started on Monday, and they're investigating the very thing about whether you use this to distort the competitive balance, because that would be classified as you violating FFP by inflating the value of sponsorships. Now, this is all a lot more complicated than this. Manchester City submitted a 165-page legal document to try and point out what was wrong with APT and overturn APT, right? And there I'm sure there are a bunch of pages and clauses and everything else that have to do with APT. But sometimes all the legalese and all the high-minded discussions, I feel like, can just get in the way of this. If we're going to do FFP, right, if the leagues around the world are going to do FFP, there needs to be a way to guarantee that people own clubs and companies can't use those companies to just pump more money in. Because the whole point of FFP is to make sure that you are spending your revenue. But if your revenue can't be trusted and it's just a giant piggy bank from your owner, right, then like if Ineos just starts sponsoring Manchester United, it doesn't even have to do with state clubs. It's just the state clubs that are doing it, right? Till further notice, right? I wouldn't put it past any of these people to try and swing that at some point. But just take Manchester City's word for it that the Gulf states are the ones being unfairly discriminated against by the APT rules. Take that to heart. But this is dumb. This is obviously dumb. And if for some reason Manchester City is able to pull this off, right, and they're able to remove the APT rules, not only will that invalidate the core of the charges against Manchester City, it will also make it inherently unfair. And I think rather hilariously, if Saudi Arabia really decides to go all out, Saudi Arabia's got about $350 billion. I think maybe even more than that to play with, which means as cute and clever as the UAE thinks it is, the UAE is a tadpole, and Saudi Arabia is a great white shark. Which means if you actually manage to remove these, and it means what I think it means, Saudi Arabia is going to turn Newcastle into the best team in the world, and Manchester City is going to be sitting there looking like an idiot anyways. So this seems like a lose-lose situation. Manchester City maybe just trying to make some noise and win some points, and maybe they think they're not going to win. Maybe if they come up with 170 pages of documents, maybe then they'd win. Look, I don't know, but let's not do this. If we're going to fix FFP, let's fix it the right way. Let's not just go full Wild West while keeping everybody else handcuffed to the freaking FFP rules, okay?